It was 11:42 a.m. on Tuesday, October 14th, 1986. The sky over Falls Church, Virginia, was a bruised shade of slate gray, threatening a rain that had been hovering in the forecast for 3 days but refused to fall. Inside the McDonald's on West Broad Street, the atmosphere was a hermetically sealed ecosystem of grease, sanitized tile, and the low-frequency hum of the milkshake machine. To 19-year-old Daniel Miller, standing behind register number 3, the moment felt indistinguishable from the hundreds of identical moments that had preceded it. He adjusted his polyester uniform, the fabric itching slightly at the collar, and watched the automatic doors slide open. The man who walked in was punctual. He was always punctual. He wore a beige trench coat that looked expensive but worn, the kind of garment that suggested a man who appreciated quality but had stopped caring about fashion a decade ago. He carried a folded copy of The Washington Post under his left arm, the headlines facing inward, pressed against his ribs. He did not look around. He did not scan the room. He walked directly to the queue for Register 3, despite Register 2 being open and empty. Daniel smiled, a reflex honed by 6 months of corporate training and suburban boredom. "Good morning, Mr. Gordon," he said. The man nodded, a tight, economical movement of his chin. "Daniel," he replied. His voice was soft, carrying a grain of an accent that Daniel had never quite been able to place. Something European, perhaps, but smoothed over by years of American living. "The usual, please. Filet-o fish, large coffee, black, 2 apple pies," Daniel recited, his fingers already dancing across the raised buttons of the register. "Eating in?" "As always," the man said. He placed a $5 bill on the counter. It was crisp. His money was always crisp. This was the ritual. It had been the ritual for 7 months. 3 times a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, the man who called himself Arthur Gordon came to this specific McDonald's, ordered this specific meal, and sat in the same booth near the back, the one with the view of the parking lot, but obscured from the main entrance by a plastic partition of fake greenery. He would eat his sandwich with a knife and fork, an eccentricity Daniel found hilarious, drink his coffee slowly, and read his paper. After exactly 45 minutes, he would fold the newspaper, place his tray on top of the trash receptacle, and vanish into the Virginia afternoon. But on this Tuesday, the ritual broke. As Daniel handed over the change, 68 cents, Mr. Gordon did not put it in his pocket. He left the coins on the counter. He looked up, and for the first time in 7 months, he made direct, prolonged eye contact with the teenager behind the register. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, and in that moment, they held a terrifying depth of resignation. "Keep the change, Daniel," he said, "and thank you. You have been very kind." He didn't wait for the food. He turned and walked out the door, leaving the receipt fluttering in the draft of the air conditioning. Daniel stood frozen, the coins cold against his palm, watching the beige coat disappear into the gray light of the parking lot. He didn't know it then, but he had just served the final meal requested by Colonel Valery Martinov of the KGB's first chief directorate, a man who had spent the last 3 years orchestrating one of the most damaging intelligence leaks in American history, right from a booth next to the play place. To understand how a teenager in a paper hat became the last known civilian contact for a Soviet ghost, we have to zoom out from the fluorescent banality of a fast food restaurant and look at the invisible war that was consuming the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in the mid-1980s. The year 1985 had been dubbed the Year of the Spy by the American press. It was a time when the tectonic plates of the Cold War were grinding together with deafening force. Yet on the surface, life in America appeared prosperous and calm. The Walker spy ring had been exposed. The defection of Vitaly Yurchenko had embarrassed the CIA, and across the intelligence community, a sense of paranoia had metastasized into a frantic hunt for moles. The Soviet Union, under the aging leadership of the pre-Gorbachev era, was desperate for technological parity, and their intelligence officers were under immense pressure to acquire scientific and military secrets. Northern Virginia was the epicenter of this shadow conflict. It was a landscape of strip malls, townhouses, and defense contractors, a place where half the population held a security clearance and the other half serviced them. In this environment, anonymity was not found in the shadows. It was found in the blindingly bright lights of consumer culture. Spies did not meet in dark alleys. They met in shopping centers, parks, and fast food restaurants. The genius of the KGB's operations in the United States during this period lay in their aggressive normalcy. They understood that the American eye glides over the familiar. A man in a trench coat standing on a street corner is suspicious. A man eating a filet-o-fish in a McDonald's is invisible. Valery Martinov, known to Daniel Miller as Arthur Gordon, was a masterpiece of this camouflage. Officially, he was a cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy in Washington. In reality, he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB, tasked with running agents within the American scientific community. He was a Line X officer, a specialist in scientific and technical intelligence. His job was to steal the future, microchips, software, laser guidance systems, and funnel them back to Moscow. But Martinov was living a double life within a double life. While he was deceiving the Americans, he was also, by late 1985, beginning to question the very system he served. He was a man caught in the psychological vice grip of espionage, the profound isolation of the undercover operative. This is where Daniel Miller entered the equation. Daniel was not an asset. He was not a target. He was something far more dangerous to a spy. He was a human connection. Daniel's dossier was brief. Born in 1967, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Average grades. A student at Northern Virginia Community College, studying business administration with a vague ambition of owning a car dealership one day. He worked at McDonald's to pay for tuition and the upkeep of a 1974 Chevy Nova that drank oil like water. He was observant in the way that bored, intelligent people are observant. He noticed patterns because he had nothing else to do. He knew which customers were having affairs, which ones were alcoholics, and which ones were lonely. He had cataloged Mr. Gordon as lonely. He was like a clock, Daniel would later tell the FBI investigators in a windowless room in the J. Edgar Hoover building. You could set your watch by him. He never ordered anything else, never brought anyone with him. But he wasn't like the other loners. He didn't look sad. He looked busy, like he was working in his head. The relationship began with the smallest of deviations from the script. One Tuesday in April, the milkshake machine had broken down, a perennial catastrophe in the fast food industry. When Mr. Gordon arrived, the manager was shouting at a crew member in the back. The noise was disruptive. "Trouble in paradise?" Mr. Gordon had asked, his voice low. Daniel had sighed, wiping down the counter. Just the compressor. It overheats if you look at it wrong. It's Soviet technology, I swear. It was a throwaway joke, a standard piece of Cold War cultural debris that Americans used to describe anything broken or clunky. But Mr. Gordon didn't laugh. He froze for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that Daniel only registered subconsciously. Then, a slow, dry smile spread across his face. "Yes, Gordon said. "Complex systems are often fragile. We expect too much of machines." "I just expect a shake when I push the button," Daniel replied. "Expectation is the mother of disappointment, Daniel." That was the first time he used the boy's name. From that day on, the transaction expanded. It was never personal in the sense of sharing life stories, but it became a philosophical exchange. They talked about the weather, about the traffic on the Beltway, about the construction of the new mall. But Gordon always twisted the topic slightly, viewing it through a lens of structural analysis. He spoke about traffic not as a nuisance, but as a flow system. He spoke about the weather as a variable that couldn't be controlled, only mitigated. For Martinov, these conversations were likely a release valve. In the high-stakes world of the KGB residency, where every word was recorded and every colleague was a potential informant, the McDonald's counter was a sanctuary of irrelevance. He could speak English, practice his American idioms, and interact with a human being who had no agenda other than selling him a pie. But unknown to Daniel, the McDonald's was not just a lunch spot. It was an operational site. The geography of the restaurant was perfect for tradecraft. It sat on a corner lot with 2 exits, allowing for easy counter-surveillance. If Martinov saw a tail, he could exit through the side door and cut through the neighboring gas station. The booth he chose offered a clear line of sight to the parking lot entrance. He could see a surveillance van arriving before the agents even opened the door. More importantly, the McDonald's served as a signal site. In the lexicon of espionage, a signal site is a location used to convey a simple message to a handler or an agent. "I am safe," "I have the package," or "abort." The signal must be innocuous, something that fits the environment perfectly. Martinov's signal was the newspaper. If he placed the Washington Post on the left side of his tray, it meant the operation was proceeding. If he placed it on the right, it meant he had detected surveillance. If he left the paper behind on the table, it was an emergency signal. Meeting aborted. Clear the area. For months, Daniel Miller watched this man eat his fish sandwich, never realizing that the positioning of the newspaper was a semaphore communicating with a KGB spotter car driving past on Route 7. He never realized that the apple pies were sometimes a timing mechanism, the heat of the filling forcing Martinov to stay exactly 10 minutes longer, aligning his exit with the passing of a bus or a contact. The operational mechanics of the Cold War were often this banal. We imagine dead drops in hollowed-out rocks and brush passes on crowded bridges, and those happened. But much of the work was simply waiting, signaling, and existing in public space without drawing fire. Martinov was a master of the gray man technique. He blended into the beige and brown color palette of the 1980s McDonald's so perfectly that he became part of the furniture. But the net was tightening. By the summer of 1986, the FBI's counterintelligence division had begun a massive, data-driven effort to map the movements of known Soviet intelligence officers. They were using traffic cameras, credit card receipts, though spies rarely used them, and good old-fashioned physical surveillance. They didn't know exactly what Martinov was doing at the McDonald's, but they knew he was there. The FBI team assigned to Martinov was named Squad 10. They were the hunters. They knew. Martinov was smart. He drove a sedan with diplomatic plates, but he drove it like a local. He knew the back roads of Falls Church in Vienna. He knew how to check for tails by making 3 right turns or slowing down unexpectedly on on-ramps. To catch him, the FBI had to become invisible too. They couldn't sit in a van in the parking lot every Tuesday. He would spot them. So they infiltrated the environment. In August, a customer started coming in on Tuesdays. A woman, middle-aged, reading romance novels. She would sit 3 booths away. She was a special agent. 2 weeks later, a construction worker started coming in for coffee at the counter. Another agent. Daniel noticed these new regulars, but he didn't connect them to Mr. Gordon. He just thought business was picking up. "You're popular today," Daniel joked one Tuesday in September, gesturing to the busy dining room. Gordon looked around, his eyes scanning the room with a precision that was anything but casual. "Crowds are good," he murmured. "Anonymity and numbers." "I guess," Daniel said. "Just means more trays to clean for me." Gordon looked at him, and for a second the mask slipped. "You have a simple job, Daniel. There is honor in a simple job. You know exactly what is expected of you. You provide a service, people eat, they leave. The transaction is pure." "It's just burgers, Mr. Gordon. Nothing is just anything," Gordon replied. "Everything is a system, and systems rot from the inside." It was a strange comment, one that stuck in Daniel's mind. Later, analysts would speculate that Martinov was feeling the heat. The pressure from Moscow was intensifying. The KGB center was demanding more results, more risks. At the same time, Martinov was becoming disillusioned. He was seeing the American system up close, not the propaganda version, but the reality of teenagers working for tuition, of families eating together, of a society that, for all its flaws, functioned without the constant terror of the state. The inflection point came in early October. The FBI had intercepted a communication suggesting that a dead drop was planned in the vicinity of Falls Church. A dead drop is a location where an agent leaves a package for a handler to retrieve later, avoiding direct contact. The FBI suspected Martinov was either filling a drop or clearing one. They ramped up the surveillance. On Thursday, October 9th, Martinov came in. He looked haggard. His coat was wet from the rain. He ordered his coffee but forgot the pies. "No pies today?" Daniel asked. Martinov looked at him, startled. "What? Oh, no sugar today, just the bitter." He sat in his booth, but he didn't read the paper. He stared out the window at the rain-slicked asphalt. He was waiting for something, or someone. Daniel watched him from the counter. He felt a strange urge to go over, to ask if everything was all right. But the barrier of the counter was absolute. The employee-customer relationship has strict boundaries. You can joke, you can chat, but you cannot cross the floor to comfort a man who looks like he is watching his world collapse. Suddenly, Martinov stood up. He hadn't finished his coffee. He left the tray on the table, a breach of his own protocol. He walked briskly to the side exit. Daniel watched him go. As the door swung shut, Daniel saw a black sedan pull out from the gas station next door and slowly trail Martinov's car. It wasn't the FBI. It was a car Daniel hadn't seen before. That weekend, Daniel didn't work. He studied for a macroeconomics exam, trying to wrap his head around supply and demand curves. He didn't know that in the real world, the supply of patience for Valery Martinov had run out, and the demand for his extraction, or elimination, was peaking. This brings us back to Tuesday, October 14th, the final visit. When Martinov walked in that morning, the FBI was everywhere. They were in the parking lot in a telephone repair truck. They were in the kitchen, posing as a health inspector. They were on the roof of the building across the street. They were ready to take him down if he made a move to exchange a package. But Martinov didn't make a move. He came to say goodbye. The interaction at the register was the only genuine moment of his day. When he told Daniel to keep the change, it was a final severance of ties. A spy cannot leave loose ends. A routine must be closed. By breaking the pattern, leaving the money, not taking the food. He was signaling the end of the operation, but he was also acknowledging the humanity of the boy who had served him. "You have been very kind." Those words haunted Daniel for years. What kindness! He had just punched buttons and handed over fish sandwiches. But in the cold, paranoid wilderness of Martinov's life, perhaps the predictable, unpretentious service of a teenager was the only kindness he experienced. Martinov walked out. He got into his car. He did not go to the embassy. He drove to a location in Maryland. 2 days later, reports surfaced in intelligence circles that a Soviet diplomat had been escorted onto an Aeroflot plane at Dulles Airport, flanked by 4 heavy-set men who were definitely not cultural attachés. He had been recalled. In the Soviet system, a recall often meant a death sentence. If they suspected he was turning, or if he had failed too badly, he would be taken back to Moscow, interrogated in the basement of the Lubyanka, and shot. Daniel didn't know any of this. He just knew that Mr. Gordon didn't come back on Thursday, or Saturday, or the next Tuesday. The regular was gone. 2 weeks later, the suits arrived. It was a slow afternoon. 2 men in dark blue suits walked in. They didn't order food. They walked straight to the manager, flashed badges, and pointed at Daniel. The manager, a terrified man named Steve, waved Daniel over. "These gentlemen want to talk to you, son." They took him to a booth. Not Mr. Gordon's booth, but one near the front. They were polite, professional, and terrifyingly intense. "Do you know a man named Arthur Gordon?" the older agent asked. "Mr. Gordon?" "Yeah, the filet-o-fish guy. Is he okay?" The agents exchanged a look. "We need you to tell us everything he ever said to you, every word, every joke. Did he ever give you anything? Did he ever ask you to hold anything for him?" He gave me 68 cents, Daniel stammered. "Did he pass you any notes? Any papers?" "No, just the change. He said I was kind." The interrogation lasted 2 hours. They made him go through the calendar. What did he wear on July 12th? Did he seem agitated on August 4th? Who was sitting near him? Daniel realized, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that he hadn't just been serving a customer. He had been a witness to a secret life. He felt a sudden, sharp sense of betrayal. The nice man who talked about traffic systems wasn't a lonely businessman. He was a player in a game Daniel didn't even know was being played. "Who was he?" Daniel asked finally, as the agents were packing up their notepads. The older agent paused. He looked at the kid, seeing the confusion. He was a colonel in the KGB, son. You were serving lunch to the enemy. The agent said it with a finality that was meant to close the book. But for Daniel, it opened a chasm. The enemy? The man who worried about the milkshake machine? The man who tipped with crisp $5 bills? The revelation shattered Daniel's perception of the world. Up until that moment, the Cold War had been something on the news. Reagan, Gorbachev, missiles in silos, the Berlin Wall. It was abstract. Now it was tangible. It smelled like tartar sauce and coffee. It had a face. In the years that followed, the story of Valery Martinov became a footnote in the history of Cold War espionage. It was revealed that Martinov had indeed been recalled, likely betrayed by Aldrich Ames, the infamous CIA mole who was feeding names to the KGB. Martinov was flown back to Moscow, interrogated, and executed. A bullet to the back of the head in a soundproof room. Daniel Miller eventually left McDonald's. He finished his degree. He didn't become a car dealer. He went into logistics. He spent his life managing systems, moving goods from point A to point B, ensuring efficiency. He became, in his own way, a master of the very thing Martinov had admired, the predictable flow of things. But he never forgot the Tuesday in October. The experience left him with a permanent skepticism about the surface of things. He learned that the world is layered. There is the visible layer, the menu, the uniform, the polite greeting, and there is the subterranean layer, where the real currents of power and danger flow. Most people live their entire lives skating on the surface. They believe that the man in the trench coat is just a man in a trench coat. They believe that a fast food restaurant is just a place to eat. Daniel knew better. He knew that any mundane moment could be a cover for something monumental. He also carried a strange, complicated grief. He mourned a KGB colonel, not the spy, not the enemy of the state, but the human being who had sat in the booth and sought a moment of peace. He wondered if, in those final moments before he was dragged back to the darkness of the Lubyanka, Martinov had thought about the McDonald's. Had he thought about the bright, artificial lights, the taste of the coffee, the boy who smiled and asked if he wanted apple pies? Perhaps that was the ultimate tragedy of the spy. To defend a system, they had to live in the enemy's world. And sometimes, they found that the enemy's world, with its simple comforts and its unwitting kindness, was a place they didn't want to leave. The McDonald's on West Broad Street was renovated in the late 90s. The brown tiles were replaced with bright pastels. The booth where Martinov sat was torn out. The physical traces of the operation were erased, sent to a landfill. But the memory remained, a ghost in the machine of suburban history. When we look back at the Cold War, we tend to focus on the summits, the treaties, the nuclear standoffs. We look at the Berlin Wall falling, but the war was also fought in the quiet spaces. It was fought in the pauses between conversations. It was fought in the exchange of glances. It was fought in the 68 cents left on a counter. The story of the cashier and the spy is not a story of a great intelligence coup. Daniel didn't catch a spy. He didn't save the country. He just witnessed the human cost of the game. He saw the moment when the player decided to stop playing, even if just for a second, to say thank you. It serves as a reminder that even in the midst of ideological collision, when two superpowers are locked in a struggle for the soul of the world, life continues on the human scale. People get hungry. They seek routine. They look for a friendly face. And sometimes, the most profound secrets are hidden not in a safe, but in the open, sitting in a booth, eating a sandwich, waiting for the rain to stop. The legacy of that encounter rippled outward in invisible ways. Daniel became a man who watched. He taught his children to notice details. Look at the shoes, he would tell them. Look at the hands. Listen to the accent. He wasn't training them to be spies. He was training them to be awake. In 2015, documents were declassified that shed more light on the Martinov case. They detailed the extent of the damage caused by Aldrich Ames. They confirmed the timeline of Martinov's recall. They mentioned the surveillance teams in Falls Church. But they didn't mention the cashier. The official record has no space for the texture of the interaction. It records the movements, not the mood. But history is more than the official record. It is the accumulation of these small, forgotten intersections. It is the friction between the great gears of history and the small, soft cogs of daily life. Daniel Miller is in his 50s now. He still lives in Virginia. Sometimes he drives past a McDonald's and feels a phantom sensation, the cold weight of coins in his palm, the smell of rain on a wool coat, the feeling of being watched by eyes that have seen too much. He wonders if anyone else is sitting in a booth right now, hiding in plain sight. He wonders if the girl at the register knows who she is serving. He knows she doesn't. and he knows that she is safer that way. Because once you see the layers, you can never unsee them. Once you realize that the world is a stage for a play you haven't read, you never quite trust the scenery again. You just keep the change, watch the door, and hope that when the regulars leave, they make it home. But in the world of shadows, home is a complicated concept. For Valery Martynov, home was the place that killed him. For Daniel Miller, home was the place where he watched him die, slowly, over 7 months of Tuesdays, without ever knowing it was happening. That is the true nature of the Cold War. It wasn't just out there, over the ocean. It was here. It was us. It was in the booth next to you. And it was quiet, polite, and deadly, right up until the moment the check came due. To fully grasp the mechanics of this deception, we must examine the environment itself. The McDonald's of the mid-1980s was a sensory masterpiece of engineered comfort. The color palette was deliberate. Earth tones, faux wood grain, amber lighting. It was designed to be womb-like, a shelter from the chaotic acceleration of the decade. For a Soviet operative, raised in the brutalist architecture of Moscow, this space must have felt like a hallucination of abundance. Martynov's choice of the filet-o-fish was likely not a culinary preference, but a tactical one. It was the least messy item on the menu. It could be eaten with one hand if necessary. It didn't drip. It allowed him to maintain dignity and cleanliness, crucial for a man who might have to attend a diplomatic function or a clandestine meeting immediately after. The coffee was his clock. He knew exactly how long it took for a large coffee to cool to a drinkable temperature, and exactly how long it took to finish it at a moderate pace. 45 minutes. The time it takes to verify a surveillance tale. The time it takes to mentally rehearse a report. Daniel noticed that Martynov never used the condiments. No ketchup, no tartar sauce packets. He left no trace. His tray, when he returned it, was organized. Napkins folded, cup upright, wrapper flattened. It was the debris field of a disciplined mind. The contrast between the two men could not have been starker. Daniel was messy, sprawling, full of the chaotic energy of American youth. He had a girlfriend named Sarah who chewed gum and waited for him in the parking lot in a beat-up Ford Escort. He listened to Van Halen and worried about his acne. He was free in a way he couldn't comprehend. Martynov was a man in a cage made of duty, fear, and lies. He was a member of the elite nomenklatura, a prince of the Soviet system, yet he was eating fast food in a Virginia suburb to feel a moment of autonomy. The FBI agents who watched him, Squad 10, were also trapped in their own way. They were trapped in the boredom of the stakeout. The ghost teams, as they were called, spent thousands of hours urinating in bottles, eating stale donuts, and writing logs that read, "Subject enters establishment 11:42. Subject consumes beverage. Subject exits 12:27. They were the accountants of treason. One of the agents, a man named Harris, later wrote a memoir. He didn't mention the McDonald's by name, but he described a fast food location in Falls Church, where the target was habitual to the point of pathology. Harris wrote about the frustration of watching a man do nothing. We wanted him to meet someone. We wanted a handoff. We wanted a briefcase exchange. But he just sat there. It was psychological warfare. He was boring us to death. Harris didn't know that the boredom was the camouflage. The tragedy of the intelligence officer is that their greatest successes look like nothing happened. If a spy is doing their job perfectly, the world remains undisturbed. The cashier sells the burger. The traffic flows. The secrets move silently through the ether. It is only when things go wrong, when the arrest happens, when the defection occurs, that the illusion breaks. For Daniel, the illusion broke the moment the agents showed him the badge. It was a violent rupture of his reality. He felt violated. He had shared space with this man. He had breathed the same air. He had felt a kinship. To be told that this kinship was a lie, or worse, a tool, was a deep psychic wound. "I felt like I had been tricked," Daniel said. Not just by him, but by the whole setup. Like if he could be a spy, then what else was fake? Was the manager really a manager? Was the mailman really a mailman? This paranoia is the contagion of espionage. It spreads from the practitioners to the civilians. It infects the groundwater of a society. In 1986, America was awash in this contagion. The movies were about spies, the Falcon and the Snowman, spies like us. The news was about spies, and in a McDonald's in Virginia, the reality of it sat in a booth and drank coffee. The disappearance of Martinoff left a vacuum. For a few weeks, Daniel found himself looking at the door at 11:42 a.m. on Tuesdays, expecting the beige coat. The muscle memory of the routine was hard to break. He would prep the coffee cup. He would check the fish supply. Then, the reality set in. He wasn't coming back. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a story that had been cut off mid-sentence. Daniel had to learn to live with the lack of resolution. He would never know why Martinoff did what he did. He would never know if Martinoff had a family, if he loved them, if he regretted his life. He was left with only the surface details. The order, the time, the change. This is the burden of the witness. You hold the pieces of the puzzle, but you never get to see the picture on the box. In the grand strategic analysis of the Cold War, the McDonald's operation, if we can call it that, was a microscopic event. It didn't change the course of the war. It didn't stop a missile launch. But in the moral history of the conflict, it looms large. It represents the intersection of the state and the individual. It shows how the massive grinding machinery of geopolitics relies on the lubrication of ordinary life. Martinoff needed the McDonald's. He needed the normalcy. It was his anchor. And when that anchor was pulled up, he drifted away into the dark currents of history, leaving only a ripple in the memory of a teenage boy. Years later, Daniel read about the execution. He read that Martinoff had been a hero to the Soviet Union, then a traitor, then a victim. The labels shifted depending on who was writing the history. But to Daniel, he remained simply Mr. Gordon, the man who liked his coffee black, the man who was kind. There is a peculiar intimacy in the service industry. You see people at their most biological. You feed them. You see them before they have put on their public faces for the office. You see them when they are tired, hungry, rushing. You see the truth of them, even if you don't know their names. Daniel saw the truth of Valery Martinoff. He saw a man who was tired, a man who was carrying a weight too heavy for one set of shoulders. On that final Tuesday, when Martinoff looked at Daniel, he wasn't looking at a cashier. He was looking at a life he couldn't have, a life of simple transactions, a life where a mistake means a burnt burger, not a bullet in the head. Keep the change. It was an offering, a wish. Keep the change. Keep the simplicity. Don't become like me. Daniel kept the coins for a long time. He put them in a jar on his dresser. Over time, they got mixed in with other coins. Quarters from 1986 became indistinguishable from quarters from 1990. They were spent on laundry, on gas, on gum. They re-entered the circulation of the American economy, anonymous and silent, just like the spy. The story fades, as all stories do. The Cold War ended. The Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union collapsed into a heap of rusting iron and broken promises. The McDonald's in Falls Church kept selling burgers. New cashiers were hired. New regulars arrived. But the echo remains. It reminds us that we are all, in some way, serving forces we do not understand. We are all standing at the register, handing over the goods, unaware of the vast, complex dramas playing out on the other side of the counter. We are all unwitting actors in history. And sometimes, if we are lucky or unlucky, the curtain lifts for a moment. We see the wires. We see the stagehands. We see the actor drop the mask. And then the door opens, the bell chimes, and the gray man walks out into the rain, leaving us with nothing but a receipt and a question that will never be answered. What did he really see when he looked at us? Did he see an enemy? A target? Or did he just see a boy, a burger, and a brief, fleeting moment of peace in a world gone mad? The answer lies buried in a grave in Moscow, and in the memory of a man in Virginia who still, occasionally, checks the time at 11:42 a.m. and feels a sudden, inexplicable chill. The architecture of the Cold War was built on such chills. It was a structure of silence, paranoia, and compartmentalization. But it was also a structure of human beings. And human beings, no matter how deeply buried in the apparatus of the state, remain stubbornly, dangerously human. They get hungry. They get lonely. They order the fish. And in doing so, they leave a mark, a grease stain on a table, a memory in a mind, a ghost in a fast food restaurant. This is the autopsy of that ghost. Not the political ghost, but the personal one. The ghost of Arthur Gordon, who existed for 7 months in 1986 and then vanished, leaving behind only the mystery of his ordinariness. In the end, the spy didn't come in from the cold. He just went out for lunch. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying and human thing of all. The investigation that followed Martinov's disappearance was a masterclass in forensic reconstruction. Squad 10 tore apart the timeline. They interviewed everyone: the janitor who mopped the floors, the supplier who delivered the buns. They were looking for the breach. They wanted to know if Martinov had passed information at the restaurant. They analyzed the trash. They found his cups. They dusted them for prints, even though they already had his prints. They were desperate for a clue that would explain why he chose this spot. Was it the proximity to a dead drop? Was it the line of sight? The report, filed in late 1986, concluded that the location was strategically advantageous for counter-surveillance. It was a technical explanation. It missed the point entirely. He chose it because it felt real. In a life of fabrication, the artificial reality of McDonald's was the most honest thing he had. The consistency was the drug. The filet-o-fish tasted exactly the same in Falls Church as it did in Moscow, if you could get one, or in London. It was a universal constant. For a man whose life was a shifting landscape of lies, a universal constant is a precious thing. Daniel Miller provided that constant. He was the keeper of the ritual, and when the ritual ended, he became the keeper of the memory. He is the last witness, the only one who saw the spy not as a target, but as a regular. And in the annals of espionage, where every contact is measured in value and risk, the value of a witness who simply saw the man is immeasurable. It grounds the phantom. It proves he was there. It proves he was real. He was there. He ate. He spoke. He vanished. The cycle is complete. The dossier is closed. But the door to the McDonald's still opens and closes, inhaling and exhaling customers, breathing the rhythm of the American day, indifferent to the secrets it once held. And somewhere in the static of history, the ghost of Colonel Martinov sits in the back booth, checking his watch, waiting for the rain to stop forever.